Okay, so where I'm at is I've got all this kind of cleaned up, vacuumed out. I went ahead and cut all my wires, got them out of the way. I labeled them so I know what's what when I go to wire everything back together. This is the transducer wire. I did it a way to where it's a total pain to get it out, so we're just going to leave that where it's at. As far as this transom brace, when I framed it, I already had to notch it, so this thing is really like, it's doing something, don't get me wrong. I'm going to have to cut it. I mean, leave a comment down below on how I'm hacking up my boat. It's in my way. I don't know what to tell you guys. This battery is massive. We're gonna have to cut it. I'm hoping when I frame this thing back together, it'll be better with the framing package than with that little dinky brace they put on there from the factory. But what do I know? I'm just a redneck in middle of Georgia, nowhere, trying to modify a John boat in his garage. So don't pay attention to me. Hey guys, Anthony Jones here with a Top Gun John boat, and this is video 2 of the rear deck rebuild. Don't forget, show your support, join the movement, and subscribe to the channel. I think my next step is to go ahead and notch out the existing framing to make room for my new framing to drop in. Okay, got my first side notched over here. This framing actually sits on another lip, guys. I don't know if you could see that. And then back here, it just ties in to the transom. What I'm thinking is I'm gonna maybe make a tray under here that it sits on. I might do angled aluminum, riveted in, just a little lip. Honestly, the more I cut into this, the more I realize I'm probably gonna go ahead and remove all of this framing and then all of this framing back here, because now it's a bunch of little pieces. Not my original plan. I kind of go further than I thought I would go. I'm feeling that the right way to do this is probably going to replace all the framing in between as well. So might as well do that while I'm here. Okay, was able to remove this small section of framing off the rear. That was a total pain to do. I had to use the hammer, the chisel, the reciprocating saw. I'm taking a razor knife and I'm scoring all the edges to break through some sealant and then some coats of paint. And then I'm gently trying to pry these off and kind of loosen the screws to see where the screws are, to cut them with a recip saw and then get it loose. When that didn't seem to work, I just took the hammer and just started beating on it. That seemed to be the most effective tactic. That also concerns me a little bit because I don't want to beat everything up with a hammer. I want to try to keep everything looking halfway decent. My patience threshold is only so high. Got all the framing removed off the rear and the framing removed up here. Guys, note kind of how this is sitting on this ledger. So this is mounted underneath that lip of that bench, and it's got some structural uprights. Quick note, I've decided on the livewell, I'm just going to drop this hose down into this rib. So I'm going to take this hose off. I'm going to make a notch here. I do have to notch this transom brace. Already cut off of it up here the first go around. So I don't know how much it's actually doing at this point. But again, unfortunately, it's in my way, so we're going to have to cut that. Everything will get tied back in together with framing, and it'll be plenty strong, so I'm not necessarily concerned. If you guys aren't, I'm not. Or, well, if I'm not, you guys shouldn't be. Other way around. broke out the Hitachi angle grinder with a cutoff wheel and went ahead and removed a lot of the material off the transom support bracket. And then I notched the rib for the livewell hose to sit flush into. Me dropping this livewell hose down flush into the rib is a big deal because it saves me a lot of work. I was going to remove the pump. That would require me to cut the 3M, sealant, remove the aerator screen, take the pump off, take the 90-degree elbow off, take the hose out, get a longer hose, route the hose around, and then back around and straight through, remount the pump, reseal everything just to relocate this hose over because it was in the way of where my battery was going to sit. Well, now with it sitting flush inside the rib, I could come back with my foam around it, come back with my plywood over it, and then the battery could sit on top of it all. I'm not a big advocate for cutting things out of your boat that could compromise the structural integrity of it. So before you go out with an angle grinder and start cutting apart your boat because you saw Anthony Jones on YouTube do it, public service announcement that I strongly discourage you from doing so. I am very confident that when I put this rear end back together, that my skill set is going to be more than capable of putting together something that is structurally sound and secure enough to support any outboard that I put on the rear end of this thing. I am finally to the point where I can start framing. I'm going to go ahead and take these pre-ripped pieces that I did down, just slowly but surely find my measurement and cut them to the length that I need. I will have to cut this backside on an angle. And what I did to find the angle of this transom for this wood to butt is I just took a scrap block of my old framing and I started cutting angles until I got it right. The angle I found was a 19-degree. So we're going to go with that. I've got my saw outside dialed in, and I do have this big boy DeWalt. But we're just going to break out the little tiny Ryobi and let her do some work on this project as we cut these small cedar blocks. And as always, measure twice and cut once. That is absolutely beautiful, guys. That is a jam up jelly tight fit, Uncle Rob would say. I'm going to show you what I had to do under here. I had to make a notch on the underside because this framing was ripped a little bit different size. So this new piece of cedar is a little bit beefier. Guys, it's important to just take your time when you're doing this. Again, this is a retrofit, not typically how I would do it. I'll tell you what, I'm real happy with how tight that fit is, and then how that notch on the underside is going to allow that plywood to come up and lock in. And that is super tight. I am shaking the whole boat and it's just sitting in there locked in. It's not even permanently attached. So that is a awesome fitment. I'm going to go ahead and cut the dividers that are going to go under here. And what I'm going to use is this 1/2-inch cabinet grade plywood that I have that's left over from another project. And this stuff is super smooth. This is what I ended up going with in the front hatch of my casting deck where my LED light bar is contained. And this stuff really, really works great. Because it is going to be some sort of structural support underneath the framing, I'm going to run it to the bottom of the boat hull. So I want to use this thicker material. And also when you paint this stuff, the paint finish just comes out really, really nice. Okay, so this will kind of show you what I'm working with. I've got the 1/2-inch plywood cut. And then if you look down here, I've recycled some of that 1/2-inch angled aluminum that I had, or C-channel. I'm going to lip it over the bottom, and that's going to give it something more solid to make contact with, and then also help protect this wood from moisture. I'm going to use that. That's going to lock into place. I'm just going to glue this to the bottom of this and then screw this into here and into the sides and then cap it. I want to show you guys something. I'm using my Bosch laser measure, and what I'm doing is, as you can see, I put it underneath in that notch, shot my laser down to the bottom, and it's giving me an accurate measurement of 9 9/16, guys. On some of this tight fitting stuff, I'm using my laser instead of my tape measure. It's impossible to get tape in there. You get this laser in there. Bosch laser measure. This thing's awesome. You can see how that C-channeled 1/2-inch angled aluminum just covers the bottom of this. And what that'll do is help strengthen it and then keep the ends from delaminating as they make contact with the bottom of the boat. Just kind of protect them. That's how I'm going to do it. As you can see, Locks in around the rib. Very tedious, guys, cutting this plywood. This is actually load bearing, okay? My framing sits on top of this divider. My framing's notched, and then the divider is actually going to add structural support. As you walk around on this, you're going to be forcing this down into the bottom of the boat. But before I permanently mount this on this, I'm going to seal all this in oil-based enamel. I'll do 2 or 3 good coats on the bottom of this. Then I'll take this and smother it in construction adhesive and then glue that on there. So to prevent this plywood from delaminating, this is going to add some structural integrity. It's also going to protect it from if there's any water in the back to where water splashes on it. It'll keep this to a certain degree out of direct contact with water. This Western red cedar is actually 1 3/4 by 3 3/4. So it's not 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches like a traditional 2x4 because it's rough cut. So I custom rip everything when I use this for framing. Right now I'm going to rip it to 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches like a traditional 2x2. Okay, as I move forward with framing, I went ahead and test the outboard on here, test fit it, because I need to figure out this hatch is going to flip up. What I need to know is where my framing is going to go across here. Redesigning the way the lid is going to go, it did flip this way. On this one, it's going to flip this way, and I just want to make sure I can clear these mounting brackets. Okay, got this just mocked up, and that's kind of what I'm thinking, somewhere in there. I'm going to go ahead and cut these back pieces that are going to require me to rip them on an angle for that transom. Making some rips on the table saw for the wood that's going to go on the transom. That's a 19 degree. And I'm just ripping my pieces. This is going to butt up, and then my framing can come off that transom. I'm to the point of framing the rear end to where I need to start tying things together to get accurate measurements on the future parts that I'm cutting and fabricating. Using some Titebond glue in between the joints. I'm definitely going to use a couple 3-inch deck screws to tie it together. I'll probably come back in on the opposite sides with some 2-inch Uber grade trim screws. I got a whole box of screws, so I'm sure I'll figure something out. Let me get it tied together and I'll show you what I did. What's supporting this is actually this lip, okay, and then this 1/2 inch plywood. And see how I've got this notch? It just locks in. And so basically all my framing is actually sitting on this plywood, and then on this lip that's got these uprights under here tied into the bottom of the boat, and then also attached to the original bench. The purpose of the glue and screws here is just to tie this together up here. It's not really any structural support. All the support is underneath it. I'm using Titebond 2, okay? I'm smothering it real good, and I'll spread it out with my finger. This piece is going to plug in like so. I'll pre-drill my holes to prevent my cedar from splitting, and I'm using a variety of screws. I'm using 2-inch trim head, which have a fine head that hides well. I'm also using some 2-inch Uber grade screws. I'm also using 3-inch Uber grade screws. This thing's going to lock in. It's going to sit on top of these. It's going to be structurally sound. I'm excited with the progress so far. Next stage is to start strategically painting some of this stuff, and then kind of get the hatches mocked up. All right, let's see. Let's see if we can weigh this guy. I don't know if you can see that. Oh, it's moving around. 4 pounds, 4 ounces. There's a big misconception that wood framing is heavy, because I mean, this looks heavy, but it's really not. This is a very light wood. So Western red cedar, baby, that's where it's at. Okay, got the rear end all framed, all put together, all in place, mocked up, and I'll tell you what, I'm very satisfied. It looks beautiful, but guys, we have a problem. So what is the problem in a nutshell? Well, I have built this hatch to accommodate the size of this battery. ePropulsion is going to send me a battery this summer to test their new E series. And I got the dimensions for that battery a while back, but you know, being the bonehead that I am, I didn't think much of it, just kind of assumed that it was roughly the same size as this guy. but it is not. It is actually, it's actually that big. And how do I know that? Because I built this as a test dummy to see if I could fit it in this area. And you kind of see my problem. There's no way to really get it in the hole. You know, this battery's 10.5 inches tall, and I'm going to lay it on its side because it's lithium ion, and you could do that with these. This new E-Series is 15.5 inches tall, which means your boy is about to have to cut his framing apart and make some alterations and change my game plan altogether just as I was starting to make some ground. But it's my own fault for not double checking the measurements that they had sent me. It's all good in the hood, baby. We're going to keep some positive vibes, and we are going to take this out and make some modifications. I think what I'm going to do is have to cut this ledger out, take these uprights out. I may have to plug some angled aluminum in there somewhere and make a hybrid at this point, but I need that space. This battery is going to have to slide down and lock into place. It needs to go all the way to that original metal bench, so I'll take that 1.5 inches if I can get it. We're going to go ahead and make sure that not only that battery fits, but my future potential battery fits as well, and just max out the storage space altogether for whatever battery I end up sticking back here. I think what I'm going to do is take this out. I may be able to shove it back, or I may just have to go with one. I don't know what I'm going to do. We're going to come up with something. And if you don't have one, you got to have a do-it-herself hammer on deck at all times. I removed that ledger. You could see where it tied into the aluminum, where those holes are. I cut it here. I cut it there. I need all the space I can get. Removing that ledger and removing those two uprights, that gives me 1.5 inches more depth. I'm thinking what I'm going to do is be able to drop the battery in and slide it back and then flip it down. If you see here, kind of this is my game plan, to drop it in and then be able to slide it under the framing and then flip it down. My problem is I'm going to have to remove this board and to be able to get it to flip. Basically, how I had my hatch design was for the hatch to kill right here and to flip up this way. And then I was going to have a small piece back here separate. And then the hatch flipping this way was going to give me clearance for these brackets. Because we're doing this now, I'm thinking I go back to my old design, which is for the hatch to actually flip this way. I'm not thrilled about it because this is how I wanted to do it, was for the hatch to flip forward. But yeah, to fit this battery, I got to do what I got to do.